Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and I'm recording this review in a gas mask because this episode of STD stinks so badly there is no other way for me to watch it without puking. The previous episode actually made me cautiously optimistic that maybe the show is improving, both in the visual style and the writing, but this one is right back to the old and nauseating STD, and once again the camera flies all over the place and not just from side to side but even upside down this time, causing severe motion sickness, and once again the lights are flickering for no reason. I guess maybe they are deliberately trying to cause epileptic seizures and headaches and migraines in the audience. And the episode begins with Tilly participating in a half marathon as part of her command program because I guess being a good runner is apparently a necessity to be in the command program. I guess that's bad news for all those officers in wheelchairs that we saw previously. They will never be in command positions, I guess. Same for blind guys like this Geordie LaForgery. I'm assuming his visor can't possibly be as good as the one LaForge used because in the movie Generations, Soren was absolutely amazed by Geordie's visor and said it's a remarkable piece of technology, and therefore here a century earlier I guess this guy's visor must be a primitive version. So I guess he will never be able to run in a dark corridor like Tilly without falling, and so I guess he'll just have to get used to the transporter room, where he will have to keep working for the rest of his life. And the same for all the wheelchair guys. Sorry guys, you don't have legs, so you'll just have to remain ensigns for the rest of your life. So anyway, why are the corridors going dark when they run through them? I guess it's not just a marathon, but some kind of obstacle course of some sort. And Saru did say something about shadow exercises later, so I guess it's deliberate. So we see that Tilly wins the race despite taking a very long break to talk to a ghost in the middle of it, and then suddenly catching up to everybody and winning. And I don't actually have a problem with her winning because we later find out that she's been infested by some kind of spore parasite, so maybe that parasite is boosting up her energy level or something. So I'm actually fine with her winning the race, but I'm not fine with the way they totally wasted and dismissed the potential of the ghost storyline. As I said in my previous review, I actually thought this story have some potential to be something interesting, something philosophical maybe, and I said the one thing they should do is keep it ambiguous and don't reveal to us if it was really a ghost or just some kind of illusion. Just make it a little bit ambiguous. You can end the storyline but keep it ambiguous so we can keep debating this topic that maybe it was a real ghost. Because remember, Tilly could not possibly know that that person died. It's a girl that she knew from school. She started seeing visions of her as an adult, then she decided to look her up and then discovered that she died. So she could not have known that before, and that kind of implies that maybe it is a real ghost. We do know that it's connected with the spores, but maybe the spore network actually hosts the consciousness of dead people or something like that. So they could imply it. They did it already with the doctor story, because Temmen saw his dead boyfriend in the spore network, and maybe that's why he didn't want to use the spore drive again, and when he had to do it later he looked kind of disappointed and sad, maybe because he didn't get to see him again there, maybe he hoped he'd be able to see him. So when they showed this ghost, I assumed that it will be connected with the spores, that it all started because that green spore landed on her. All of that is fine, but I wish they would have kept that ambiguous and implied that maybe it's not just a figment of imagination or an illusion, but instead that it might be an actual consciousness. And I said leave it ambiguous, just don't answer this question fully. And instead, what do? They reveal that it's just an illusion, that it is a spore parasite using her memory to pretend to be that person, and then they suck it out of her with a ghostbuster kind of technology, and that's it. So that's really a cop-out, so they didn't really do anything with this idea, which could have been interesting. And that's what this show has always been doing. They always set up something that can be interesting and then not doing anything with it. And in this case it doesn't even make sense, because Tilly didn't know that woman died until after she looked her up. And she never saw her as an adult either, so how could this be just a random coincidence that she saw someone as a ghost and only later discovered that that person is really dead? So I think it would have been so much more interesting to imply that maybe it wasn't just an illusion, that maybe it was an actual ghost. So what did they do? They basically showed that this ghost is just a rambling idiot illusion, and making it specifically clear that it cannot be a real person since she doesn't even know what tears are. So she can't be a real human, and then they reveal that it's just a spore infection in Tilly, and then they exorcise that in a ghostbuster fashion, and that's it. So what was even the point of this entire story? I mean, this is another wasted opportunity to do something interesting when they had everything set up for it, and then just ending with a silly cop-out. And I guess this whole story was just so that they could do the Ghostbuster special effect. That was their only purpose, apparently. And it was funny how Stamens did it so casually as if he did it multiple times before. This kind of scene would have been fine on the Orville, which is a comedy show, then I'd be totally okay with it, but here it's supposed to be a serious science fiction series, which is taking itself seriously, and then they do silly stuff like this, which is supposed to be comedic, but it makes all the characters look just irresponsible and silly and stupid. And also before this there was that scene on the bridge in which Tilly started going nuts, and so I guess that was supposed to be funny, but doesn't that ruin her character? I mean, I don't think she should be in the command program after this, because this is not the first time that she's concealing important information from her superiors. Previously in the short tracks we saw that she was harboring a fugitive and then letting her go, someone who was wanted by the Federation, and she didn't inform anyone on the ship. And now she's seeing ghosts but doesn't tell anyone. So this is extremely irresponsible behavior. So I don't think she should be allowed to be in the command program or even in Starfleet at all. So anyway, then Stamens uses that device to suck that thing out of her like Ghostbusters. And I have no problem with the special effect itself, even though it looks kind of silly. I mean, how come this huge mass doesn't even tear through her skin or her uniform? But because it was previously established that the spores are made out of some exotic matter that resides in a discrete subspace domain, so I guess that means most of it is out of phase from normal matter, so that's why it didn't tear through her clothes. And what did annoy me in that scene is that all that stuff then floats in mid-air, so why is it floating? Didn't they previously show that original green spore falling on Tilly, which means that gravity does affect the spores? And yet this huge mass is just floating freely in mid-air, and then they trap it inside a spherical force field, and this once again seems way too advanced from what we saw in all the other shows, and this is supposed to be a prequel, but in all the other Star Trek shows, most of which took place a century later, they always showed that force fields are generated from a device or from segments of the wall, and it was always totally straight. And whenever we saw force fields being used in corridors, we always saw it appear in between those frames in the corridor, so that implied that it cannot just appear anywhere on the ship. And it was always straight and in between walls and all of that, presumably coming out of a generator, and it has to be close to it or connected to it, and that's why it seems way too advanced here, especially for the time period. And remember that in TOS the shuttle bay didn't even have a force field, they always had to repressurize the shuttle bay every time they opened and closed it. Maybe I could forgive this because they did say that this ship is more advanced than other ships in the fleet, that it is way more expensive, and this scene takes place in the spore room, so maybe it was designed for stuff like that. So maybe I could forgive this one, but it is annoying that they really don't care about trying to connect things visually to make sense. And talking about things that don't match up visually, we finally see the Klingon orcs again, and now most of them have hair suddenly, and they look even sillier now than they did before. And take a look at L'Oreal here, who from now on I will call L'Oreal, but how exactly did her head become smaller once she grew her hair? So what, does the back of her head shrink if it gets covered by hair? It doesn't make any sense. Also, how much time passed exactly in between seasons? Because for a human it would take years to grow hair that long. So maybe you could say the Klingons have a higher metabolism, that's why they grow it faster. And yet we saw L'Oreal in the brig for weeks in the previous season, and she didn't grow any hair on her head. Michael says that because it's post-war, they are now growing their hair back. And yet they were all hairless even before the war started. In the very first episode, in those flashback scenes with Takuvma, we saw that all the Klingon children were hairless decades before the show started. And in TNG there was a scene of Worf going to the barber, Mr. Mott, and he was worried that he might cut too much of his hair off, so Worf seemed really concerned about losing some of his hair. And in another scene, Worf said that Klingons consider a beard a symbol of courage. Maybe Worf was just a liar, maybe whenever he wanted something he just said is the Klingon tradition, when it wasn't, so we can explain it that way I guess, by saying Worf was a liar all those times. So anyway, back to the show. So we have a scene on the bridge and the camera is once again floating all around and everything is shot in one take, which means those chicks at the helm have to turn around toward the camera every time they have a line. And if this is the way they work, then this is a very poor bridge design. If no one hears them unless they turn around, that means they lose eye contact with their displays every single time they have to say something to the captain. And the camera made several full circles around the entire bridge as everyone turns around to face the camera, and add to that a whole bunch of lens flares everywhere, and I'm starting to get physically ill from watching this, and I'm not joking, I feel motion sickness from watching this show. And I thought they are going to improve it in season 2 because the previous episode looked much better, without all this shaky cam nonsense. Maybe it was because Jonathan Frakes directed that episode, so maybe he toned it down, and I was hoping that maybe they listened to the criticism, but now I find out I was mistaken. They don't care, they seem to be doubling down on that kind of artistic style, which a lot of people complain about it, not just me. A lot of people feel physically sick from watching this shit. And I said many times, I'm fine with this kind of camera work if it serves a purpose, if it's part of some action scene, we need to see the action better, we need to feel like we're there with them, to feel the danger, or because some kind of special effect requires the camera to stay with it, to make it all seem more realistic, or cooler, or whatever. If it serves a purpose, that's fine, but in this scene, nothing is really happening. So I guess this camera work is just supposed to give us the illusion that something important is happening, because the only thing that actually happened is that they made Sarek's ship and it carries Amanda. That's all that happened in this entire scene. And this is information that could have been delivered to us in one short line of dialogue. But instead we have to go on this roller coaster ride around the bridge for 2 fucking minutes just to get this information. Anyway, then Amanda beams to Discovery to meet Michael. And I've said this before, but why is Amanda still so young?